welcome to an apple a day with Dr. Amanda. I'm so glad you're here. So welcome, grab a chair, maybe grab some coffee or tea and some apples if you want. And I'm so glad this week we're going to be talking about family themes and particularly navigating adoption. And so the whole week we'll be talking about tips and having special guests such as Dr. Sarah McKinnon, as well as some other guests to talk about this process. And again, the whole purpose of this is to be a safe place for people to be able to share their experiences and also empower you in your journeys. So again, like, share, subscribe, and tell a friend. If you're on YouTube and on podcast, make sure you tell people and have them share. So without further ado, I'm so delighted to have Dr. Sarah McKinnon with me today. And she is a board certified behavior analyst, and she supports students with autism and works a lot with families. And I definitely know she has a passion for that. So I'm sure she'll hit on that even in her stories. And Sarah's also a mom, a mother of 6. She has 1 child that's adopted. She has 3 biological children and 2 stepchildren. So again, Sarah, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Absolutely. And so I just want to get, I know you have a story to share with us. And so what is the typical adoption process? What does that look like?
So I actually adopted my daughter 21 years ago from Russia. Russia no longer is open for adoption to American citizens, but at the time, I went through an American adoption agency, which actually has a branch in the Lehigh Valley, Adoptions from the Heart. So I went through the process to go through them. You have to be vetted, go through all the clearances. You have to take classes. You have to come with recommendations. You have to, just go through this long process and basically prove that you're, going to be okay to adopt a child.
Wow. And so thanks for sharing that. It is a very long process, it seems like, and there's very thorough process. And that really goes into, I guess, my next question, which is, are there benefits of that current adoption system? Now, I know you had that experience. You said that, again, there's some changes, but do you think the current adoption system is a good process, or is there anything else you think would be a benefit to that system?
I mean, at the time that I adopted from a foreign country, we were only had to travel to the country 1 time. My understanding from being in contact now with other families who adopt internationally is that they have to travel to foreign countries multiple times. So that would be a hindrance financially, and also if you have other children to leave behind, it would be very difficult. And also from a monetary standpoint, at 1999, it cost about $25,000. I think now it's probably upwards of $30,000 to adopt internationally. So definitely, a financial difficulty for many people.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing about that, because it is it seems like a lot monetarily, but I guess in terms of the screening process, like, do you see a benefit to that? Just thinking of, I know obviously there's reasons that it might not be a good benefit, but in terms of like child trafficking and everything else, like, do you think that they have a good process in place, or do you think that some of it could be altered?
I think the screening process is absolutely necessary. I mean, going through the fingerprinting, the clearances, the recommendations. Actually, about 5 years ago now, I actually traveled to Guatemala as a volunteer in a special needs orphanage. They actually had shut down international adoption because of child trafficking, which is just so their process was not as stringent to have children leave. And then unfortunately, these kids were put in these awful situations. So I don't think that they can be careful enough. I would say the downside of that is sometimes, I think for some of the families going through it, they almost feel like they have to prove their worthiness to be parents, and I think I was able to have biological children. For those people who aren't, I think sometimes from an emotional and mental standpoint, that can be difficult. So,
yeah. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that we have to have such stringent regulations, but then if we're looking at, like you said about your experience, even going to orphanage, unfortunately, there are people that take advantage of that system, and children who are already right at risk, and children that need homes. So there is a precaution, but it is hard for parents who or families that don't have children and they really want to, right, have these children and all that other additional emotional and financial burdens of having to go through that long process. So it is difficult in general. So thanks for sharing about that.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things, the benefit, obviously, also to the children, having been in a few international orphanages, it's heartbreaking to see the number of children that don't get adopted and the number of children that need homes, So some of those stumbling blocks are just so sad because they maybe possibly could be placed in loving homes.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is heartbreaking, right? There's so many children and so many needs of children who need to know they're loved and wanted, right? And that they are important. And that is a major crisis. I agree. And so also just thinking about your overall adoption experience. I know you shared about that. How did you find your overall adoption experience to be?
I mean, the process of going through the adoption agency, that part of it was, just being well organized, getting the paperwork done, getting everything completed. The experience of traveling to Russia was amazing. That was amazing to see another, culture. The orphanage was, like I said, it was a heartbreaking experience. But then meeting my daughter for the first time, I did share with some of the people who were in my adoption classes who had never had biological children, that the moment I met my daughter, I felt the exact same way as I did when I gave birth to my children. Like, I was in love with her. She was mine. It was no different. But when, she came home, I would say it became one of the most challenging experiences. She ended up having a lot of special needs, which evolved more and more over the years, and some of the things that, came about. But that changed the course of my life. I went back to school to get my degree to become a behavior analyst. So she certainly was life-changing. And I think she's changed the lives of my other children too, to make them very empathetic and more caring, and just, I think, overall better human beings because of my daughter.
That's so great. And I love how you shared how you felt the same way you did about her as you did your children, your biological children. I think that's so incredible. Just that connection that you're like, this is my daughter, she's mine. Just having that mentality, is so important that you are modeling for your children. And she probably felt that, that genuine, pure love, of a mother's love that has definitely probably changed the trajectory of her life. So that's incredible. And thanks for sharing that, poignant moment, because again, it is so important for people to know. And I think sometimes, we have biological kids or kids that we foster, but really kids are kids, right? And that you can bring them in and they can be your family. And it's like, maybe not blood, but they become huge parts, and ends up being family. So I love that story. And then just in terms, just going back, I know we talked about the system, but are there any other changes that you would make to the system that you think would be beneficial? And if not, it's okay.
I mean, we talked a little bit about this. I think lessening some of the financial hardships and some of the red tape, but obviously the other side of that, if we're not careful enough, the children can slip into the wrong hands. I would say definitely probably the financial part. I think there's people who could definitely afford to have children and raise them, but that initial output of, $30,000 plus definitely can be, detrimental to the family or prohibit them from being able to adopt at all.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then thinking about your experiences, and perhaps there's families that are in that process that you went through with the adoption process, or even looking at that fostering process, what would you say to them? Maybe they're in the middle, that's frustrating, or like you said, the financial or the red tape. Like, what would you say to these families that are so wanting to do this and maybe discouraged?
I would say, I think, like I touched on before, that the minute you see your adopted child, it's like, the minute you meet, give birth and see your biological child, from that aspect, it'll change your life forever for the better. And, I think it's just like anything in life, just kind of going with the flow. And when the time is right, it'll be the right child for you. Um, so I just think that's just important. You have to be patient. And of course, anything that involves paperwork, and then even more so, anything that's done internationally might take even a little bit more time. And I know now families need more patience than ever because they have to travel back and forth a few times.
Yeah. Those are great tips. I like how you really pretty much said, go with the flow. And that's hard sometimes, right? For different parents or families, or you can't see the end, right? The end of the tunnel, the light at the end of the tunnel. And just knowing there is a process and really just knowing the outcome, right? That you will have that child and that the timing will come where that right child's there and that right fit and the right timing. So I love that because that helps to, right, keep that hope in the situation that might seem hard in it. So thank you. And then looking at families that are looking to adopt. So maybe they're not even in the process. What are some helpful tips that you would recommend for them?
If you were looking to adopt internationally, I would say go to a reputable adoption agency. I mean, I didn't have the luxury back then to probably, do Google search and see reviews, but nowadays I, see what other people have said, see, you can go meet with them, talk with them, see what the process is like. And then nowadays too, there's so many Facebook groups or different groups of parents you could reach out to and see what their experience was like. I think that would be very helpful. And I also think one of the things that always resonated with me about my own experience is back then they used to give videotapes of the child and you could see if you wanted them or not. My daughter had been passed up 6 times. People didn't want to adopt her. So I think it's important just to be open, like to just love the child that comes your way. Remember that, you're in this for a child and that they all need someone to love them.
Well, that's really powerful. And I love that, you weren't discouraged. You didn't look at the, oh, she was passed up 6 times. You looked at the video and you had that connection, that 7th time, did she get a blessing of you, so you were like not looking at anything else, was saying, I want to look at these videos and we're open, like you said, open to what you might not expect, to happen. So I think that's really helpful for those who are going through that process. And then when did you know that it was time to adopt? I know you had mentioned that you did this 21 years ago, but when did you have that internal, I want to do this. I know it's time.
I think ever since I was, a young child, I always thought about kind of reaching out more into the world. I was very lucky to be able to have biological children. So I did already have a child, but I saw a documentary actually on Romanian orphans. And for whatever reason, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I just really thought, this is something I'd like to look into and maybe to do. At that time, actually, Romania had shut down. So, Russia was fine. So it was just kind of some of it I stumbled upon, like I said, but I definitely was something that I always thought about doing.
I think that's incredible that you always had that, because I feel like sometimes we know, there's this internal, you know, something inside of us was placed, a dream or a vision that you had, and you really got birth forth in a different way where you were able to then find, this orphanage and then find your daughter, like how amazing across the whole continent. I just think it's incredible that your heart and your dream was fulfilled, and that your life changed, but you loved her, it was just like you knew that you were going to meet her. And I just think that's amazing. So, even for those of you in the audience, maybe you have that drive. It might be nerve wracking. You're like, is it time? And you'll know, just like Sarah was talking about, or you might have that dream and maybe it isn't a not now right now, but maybe it's going to come, or it is a now. And so hopefully, you're encouraged by Sarah's, story, which is incredible, about if you have that passion. And there are so many kids out there, but again, you'll find that fit like Sarah talked about. And then Sarah, I know you did talk about some things you learned in this process, but is there anything else that stands out to you about what you learned in the adoption process?
I think perspective in life is everything, has everything to do with happiness as well. And I can't say enough how this changed my perspective on the world and on the people we love. Like you mentioned before, it's not blood that binds, you know, it's love and the people that you want to spend your life with and connect with. And so I think that's really powerful. But I just feel truly grateful that I was able to have her in my life, and I think the people that have met her and connected with her as well feel like it's been such a good experience for myself, but even my extended family.
Yeah, that's incredible. So thank you. And I love that, you said that, again, you learn so much about yourself, you learn your family and that, yeah, it's not about blood. It's like, who do we want to spend our life with? Who's meaningful to us and how can we learn how to love, right? Learn how to love well. And so I really think you do that, you're learning how to, and you continue to grow. So I love that story. And then thinking about the adoption process, are there any books or resources or maybe website links or anything that helped you or perhaps you think would help families navigate that now?
Now I really think that there's so much good resources you can tap into on the internet, but I would say I think the best place to go would be try to get into some kind of like support group or parents who've been through probably a similar type of adoption, especially if it's within the same country that you're going to adopt from, because they can really walk you through the process and probably ease some anxieties about, like you said, overcoming some of the difficulties with wait times or frustration with dealing with not only the American government, but government agencies abroad. And then I think really remembering, like we talked about, like the end goal, that it's worth it,
Yeah.
that your perseverance and endurance through the process is worth it in the end.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you said, again, there are, I'm sure national, international, different resources for foster care, adoption process and learning what the different government regulations are. And also knowing that there is a process, but, again, even maybe finding other support groups of people who've gone through the process, I'm sure there's a lot on whether it be Instagram, right, social media, and even looking for, perhaps calling the State Department or different places, that in the US, even the United States, I'm sure there's different systems where you can go and, like Sarah said, be able to learn the process so that you don't feel overwhelmed and that you can learn some things about it as you go. So those are great ideas. And then finally, again, Sarah, and I appreciate your stirring the audience. I'm sure a lot of you may not even know what this looks like or intrigued or just listening. Maybe you're, parents that are listening and have this gnawing feeling that deep down that you want to do this, or maybe you are younger, but you have a dream about doing this, just like Sarah, or you've been through the adoption system or, foster care, maybe you want to do that yourself. So wherever you are, your parent, educator, hopefully you were able to glean some really amazing wisdom from Sarah and like her story. And finally, Sarah, just talking, I know you talked so much about amazing things and what you learned and how your family changed for the better. But is there one more wisdom tip that you would like to leave with the audience about the adoption process?
Well, quite often, as I've mentioned, my daughter does have special needs. And I think I've gotten the question a few times, like, would I have adopted her had I known the extent of her needs? I don't think you ever want to go into the process like that. I think, like again, we talked about, like, it's just being open and knowing that the child you get was meant to be. And so I always like to say, sometimes people say, oh, she's so lucky. And I think I'm the lucky one. We're the lucky one. She's given us more than we ever have given her. So that would be what I would leave people with, that you'll gain more than you ever could, than the child would ever get from you. So.
That's so great. I love that, wisdom is, like you said, you learn more from her. And instead of thinking, would I ever do that again with having this child, you instead had the perspective of, she's my daughter. She was meant to be, she was meant to be my life. And I learned more from her than I could ever have her learn from me. And that's so incredibly not just humbling, but also touching, to hearts. And so genuine. So again, you looked at it from a different perspective. We can go down different roads, but you chose to look at it as, this is my gift. She's my gift, and she's a gift to my family. And she probably feels the same way. I know you can't speak for her, but I'm sure her having you, change her life. So again, thank you so much, Sarah. And again, audience, if you're listening in, this is an incredible story and journey, and you may all have had different experiences, but I encourage you, again, if you are interested, to certainly do this. And I don't know, Sarah, sometimes I ask is if people had questions about this process, is there any way, that you'd be comfortable sharing, I don't know if you have an email or anything else if they did have questions, or like a way to reach you that you'd be comfortable with?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone can email me with questions. I have, when people find out, a lot of times people will ask me questions, and I'm always, happy to answer and tell about my experience.
Great. Okay. So I'll make sure, like I said, on the podcast and on the YouTube channel, I will have Sarah's, she'll give me the email and any information that she's comfortable with you. If you have any questions about the adoption process or any questions, if you really enjoyed this, and you want to get in touch with Sarah, certainly we can do that. So again, like, share, subscribe. If you're part of this whole week, we'll be talking about navigating adoption, so important, and even that foster care system, and really thinking about our children. How can we make sure every child, like I have a heart, just like Sarah, to make sure every child, right? We can't help every single child as one human being, but how can we as a society and in the nations help our children know that they're loved and wanted and be able to have foster and adoption? And there's so many children, but it's wonderful. Like Sarah, you had one child, but it's important as one child can change a whole nation, can change a whole city, can change a whole family. So, whether it be one child or anything else, I feel like our hearts are aligned in wanting to navigate and advocate for all children, and especially children in the system. So if you are in the audience and you have a heart for this, just know that there's support. And you heard Sarah's story, and I'm sure there's so many others like her. And again, just go for it if that's your heart. So again, thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. And thank you, audience. Come back again.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome. Be well.